It's early morning. She hasn't even left the bed yet. Her phone is already in her hand. Not because someone important messaged her, but because silence feels uncomfortable. She scrolls. Instagram, stories, other women smiling, traveling, being loved, being desired. And before her day even starts, she already feels behind. Not in life, not financially, not socially, emotionally. Nothing bad has happened. No fight, no betrayal, no crisis. Yet there's a quiet dissatisfaction sitting in her chest, and it's been there for a long time. This is the modern female emotional state nobody wants to talk about. Men feel it too, but differently. You notice it when she says, "I don't know what's wrong." She's irritated without a clear reason. She gets bored, even when things are going well. She wants more, but can't define what more is. And the most dangerous part? She believes this unhappiness is personal. You believe it's your responsibility. Both are wrong. What you're witnessing isn't moodiness, it isn't entitlement, it isn't weakness. It's psychological overload. For the first time in human history, women have unlimited choice, constant attention, social comparison 24/7, narratives telling them they should feel fulfilled all the time. The female nervous system was never designed for this, not because women are flawed, but because biology doesn't evolve at the speed of technology. So instead of peace, the mind stays alert. Instead of contentment, it scans for improvement. Instead of gratitude, it compares. And comparison is the enemy of happiness. Here's the truth nobody says out loud. Modern women aren't unhappy because they lack things. They're unhappy because nothing is allowed to be enough anymore. Every achievement is temporary. Every relationship is provisional. Every feeling is questioned. Even happiness itself feels suspicious, like something better should be coming next. And when it doesn't, disappointment quietly replaces joy. Men misinterpret this completely. They think if I become better, she'll be happy. So they improve, they sacrifice, they explain, they adapt. But the unhappiness doesn't leave because it was never caused by you. It was caused by a system that trained the mind to crave more stimulation than peace. And once a nervous system learns restlessness, calm starts to feel empty. This is why stability feels boring, peace feels dull, good men feel nice but not exciting, drama feels strangely alive. The mind confuses intensity with meaning, and that confusion is everywhere now. What you're about to hear in this video won't flatter modern culture, but it will finally make sense of why dissatisfaction is rising, why relationships feel fragile, why nothing seems to satisfy for long. This isn't about blaming women, it's about understanding the conditions they're living under. And until you understand those conditions, you'll keep asking the wrong questions. Because unhappiness today isn't random, it's engineered inadvertently by excess without grounding. And this is only the beginning. Bright lights, endless choices, sounds designed to keep you alert. Nobody walks into a casino to relax. They walk in to stimulate the nervous system. Now understand this. Modern life has turned the female emotional environment into a psychological casino. Dating apps, social media, attention from strangers, validation from places she never asked for. At first, it feels empowering. So many options, so much choice, so much freedom. But the brain doesn't experience abundance as peace. It experiences it as responsibility. Every option carries a question. What if I choose wrong? And when choices are infinite, the fear of choosing wrong never turns off. This is the hidden cost of modern female freedom that nobody wants to talk about. In the past, limitation created clarity. You chose from what was available. You committed because alternatives were limited. You built meaning over time. Now, choice never ends. So commitment feels like loss. Not loss of bad options, loss of imagined perfect ones. And the imagination is always more seductive than reality. This is why many women feel uneasy even in good relationships. Not because the man is failing, but because the mind keeps whispering, "What if there's someone better?" Not better in reality, better in fantasy. Fantasy doesn't require compromise, reality does. And the human brain prefers fantasy when overstimulated. Here's where unhappiness quietly enters. The female nervous system evolved to bond deeply once safety and attraction were established, but modern environments prevent bonding from settling. Why? Because the brain stays alert for new stimuli, new attention, new messages, new possibilities. This constant scanning creates anxiety, not visible anxiety, low-grade background anxiety, the kind that never fully relaxes. And a nervous system that never relaxes cannot experience contentment. This is why happiness today feels fragile. It shows up briefly, then disappears, because the mind is already searching for what's next. Men misread this as emotional instability. It's not, it's decision fatigue. Imagine being asked every day, "Are you sure this is the best choice you could make?" Eventually, certainty collapses. This is why women often say, "I don't know what I want anymore." It's not confusion about desire, it's exhaustion from choice, and exhaustion breeds dissatisfaction. Now let's talk about comparison, the most destructive force of all. Social media doesn't just show better lives, it shows edited happiness. Moments without context, smiles without struggle, love without boredom. The brain doesn't know this is artificial. It compares anyway. So even when life is objectively good, it feels insufficient. This creates a dangerous loop. More options, more comparison. More comparison, less satisfaction. More satisfaction, more searching. More searching, more options. And the cycle never ends. Women aren't unhappy because they want too much. They're unhappy because their environment never lets them rest. Now here's the part men must understand deeply. You cannot compete with infinite options. You cannot outperform fantasy. You cannot stabilize someone whose nervous system is trained to stay alert. The moment you try, you become part of the pressure, and pressure kills desire. This is why many men feel they're doing everything right and still losing emotional connection, because the battlefield was never fair to begin with. It wasn't designed for peace, it was designed for engagement. And engagement is addictive, but never fulfilling. This is the quiet tragedy of modern dating. Everyone is stimulated, nobody is settled. Everyone is chasing feelings, nobody is building meaning. And in this environment, unhappiness isn't an exception, it's the default. Until the system changes or the individual learns to detach from it, this dissatisfaction will continue. Not because women are flawed, but because their emotional landscape has been hijacked by excess. And excess always erodes peace. Now that you understand how abundance destroys contentment, we need to talk about something even more dangerous: expectations. Because options don't just create anxiety, they create impossible standards. And that's where the real collapse begins.
Here's where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Because options alone don't destroy happiness, they reshape expectations. And expectations, when left unchecked, become emotional poison. Modern women are not unhappy because they want too much. They're unhappy because they've been taught that wanting more is always justified, without being taught the psychological cost of that belief. From a very young age, the message is subtle but constant. You deserve more. Don't settle. Never compromise. Your happiness comes first. Individually, these ideas sound empowering, but stacked together without limits, they create a mental structure that cannot be satisfied. Because happiness requires containment, and containment requires acceptance of limits. But modern culture treats limits as oppression.
So expectations rise while tolerance for imperfection collapses. This is where the female nervous system starts to fracture. Let's break it down clearly. In relationships today, a woman is unconsciously expected to experience constant emotional understanding, uninterrupted excitement, deep security, validation on demand, sexual chemistry, intellectual stimulation, personal growth, freedom without loneliness, all at once, from one man at all times. In no previous civilization did one human carry this many emotional roles. In the past, fulfillment was distributed. Family provided stability, community provided belonging, work provided purpose, faith or tradition provided meaning. Now, everything collapses onto one romantic relationship. And when that relationship inevitably fails to deliver perfection, disappointment doesn't feel situational, it feels existential. This is why modern dissatisfaction feels so heavy, not explosive, persistent. A background sense of something is missing, even when life is objectively good, even when the partner is objectively decent, even when there's nothing specific to complain about. Expectation collapse happens quietly. You don't notice it in one moment. You notice it when joy fades faster than it used to. Gratitude feels forced. Contentment feels temporary. Irritation appears without cause. The brain begins to focus on what's lacking rather than what exists. This is not emotional immaturity. It's conditioning. When expectations are limitless, reality always disappoints. And disappointment, repeated often enough, turns into unhappiness. Now, here's the part men almost never understand, and it costs them everything. When a woman feels disappointed, she doesn't experience it as, my expectations might be unrealistic. She experiences it as, something is wrong with my life. And then, something is wrong with my relationship. And eventually, something is wrong with him. This is how expectation collapse silently poisons relationships. Not through conflict, but through erosion. Affection decreases, respect softens, desire fades. Not because the man changed, but because the internal standard kept rising. Men respond the worst possible way. They try harder. They explain more. They adjust more. They sacrifice more. But effort does not fix expectation inflation. In fact, effort often confirms it. Because the more a man adapts, the more the subconscious message becomes, if he can change, maybe the situation is still fixable. And the mind continues searching for an ideal that doesn't exist. This is why good men often feel invisible. Not because they aren't enough, but because nothing can be enough under collapsing expectations. Now let's talk about the most dangerous illusion of all, the belief that happiness should be continuous. Modern narratives quietly suggest that if you're not feeling fulfilled, you're doing something wrong. But happiness was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be periodic. Moments of satisfaction, followed by neutrality, followed by effort, followed by meaning. But when neutrality is labeled as unhappiness, the mind starts to panic. It starts searching for stimulation to escape the discomfort of nothingness. And that search creates restlessness. Restlessness creates dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction becomes the default emotional state. Women don't wake up unhappy. They wake up expecting to feel something. And when life doesn't deliver an emotional high, it feels like failure. This is the core misunderstanding. Peace feels boring to a nervous system trained on excitement. Stability feels suffocating to a mind trained on novelty. Consistency feels dull to emotions trained on contrast. This is not a moral failing. It's psychological misalignment.
And until expectations are recalibrated, no amount of love, success, or attention will feel sufficient. Now here's the part most men hear clearly. You cannot argue someone out of expectation collapse. You cannot logic them into gratitude. You cannot perform your way into permanent fulfillment. Trying will only exhaust you, because expectations don't respond to effort. They respond to limits. And modern culture refuses to teach limits. Instead, it sells desire without restraint. And desire without restraint never rests. This is why unhappiness today feels endless. Not dramatic, not tragic, just constant. A quiet dissatisfaction humming beneath everything. And if you don't understand this, you'll keep personalizing a problem that isn't personal. Because expectations are only the surface layer. Underneath them lies something even more powerful. Neurochemistry. And once dopamine enters the equation, unhappiness becomes addictive.
Now we move beneath expectations, into the chemistry. Because once dopamine enters the story, unhappiness stops being emotional and starts becoming biological. Here's the truth no one wants to say clearly. Modern unhappiness isn't just felt, it's reinforced. The female brain, like every human brain, is wired to seek dopamine. Dopamine is not happiness, it's anticipation. The excitement before the reward, the thrill of what might happen. And in today's world, dopamine is everywhere. Dating apps, social media, attention, validation, endless comparison. Each swipe, each message, each notification, a tiny hit, a small surge, and the brain learns something dangerous. More is always available. This changes how satisfaction works. In earlier times, desire had friction. You waited, you invested, you committed. Now desire is instant, and instant desire doesn't bond, it stimulates. This is why modern attraction feels intense at first and hollow later. Dopamine spikes at novelty, not stability, not familiarity, not consistency. So when a relationship settles into routine, as all healthy relationships do, dopamine drops. And instead of interpreting that drop as normal emotional regulation, the modern mind interprets it as, I'm losing interest. Something feels off. Maybe this isn't right. This is where dissatisfaction begins. Not because love failed, but because stimulation declined. And here's the brutal part. Dopamine doesn't just respond to pleasure, it responds to possibility, which means the idea of someone better can be more stimulating than the presence of someone real. This is why even happy moments feel incomplete, because the brain whispers, what else is out there? This isn't character weakness, it's neurological conditioning. Every time someone imagines a better option, dopamine activates. And imagination is unlimited, reality is not. So reality loses. Now look at modern life. A woman can receive attention without commitment, experience attraction without responsibility, feel desired without investment. This creates dopamine without grounding, and dopamine without grounding creates restlessness. Restlessness creates dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction becomes a baseline. This is why happiness feels temporary, because the nervous system is trained to crave change, not peace. And peace doesn't stimulate dopamine, it regulates it, which feels boring to an overstimulated brain. Here's a modern example most people recognize immediately. A woman is in a stable relationship. The man is consistent, kind, predictable, emotionally available. Objectively, things are good, but internally she feels numb. Not sad, not angry, just understimulated. Then someone new enters the picture. A coworker, an old flame, a stranger online. Suddenly, energy returns. Not because the new person is better, but because novelty reignites dopamine. And the brain mislabels that surge as connection. This is how dopamine disguises itself as destiny. And once that association forms, the current relationship feels dull by comparison. Not because it lacks value, but because it lacks chemical intensity. This is why dissatisfaction often spikes after attention, not before. More validation doesn't create contentment. It raises the stimulation threshold. Now the nervous system needs more to feel the same thing. This is classic addiction behavior. And yes, emotional addiction follows the same pattern as substance addiction. Tolerance increases, baseline satisfaction decreases, restlessness grows. This is why many women feel unfulfilled, even while living lives previous generations could only dream of. More comfort, more freedom, more choice, but less peace. Because dopamine-rich environments are not happiness-rich environments. They are desire-rich. And desire, when left unchecked, is exhausting. Now, here's where things become deeply uncomfortable. Once the brain associates novelty with relief from dissatisfaction, it begins to seek disruption. Not consciously, subconsciously. Small irritations grow larger. Flaws feel heavier. Stability feels restrictive. The mind starts rationalizing escape. He's not growing. I've changed. I want more from life. These statements feel true, but they are often post hoc explanations for a biochemical craving. The nervous system wants stimulation, and stability won't provide it. This is why modern unhappiness becomes self-perpetuating. Because once novelty becomes the solution, contentment becomes the problem, and no relationship can survive that framework. Now pause for a moment. This isn't about blaming women. Men experience dopamine addiction too, through porn, status chasing, and endless ambition. But the form is different. Men externalize dissatisfaction through conquest. Women internalize it through emotion. Both suffer. But in relationships, this difference creates constant misunderstanding. Men think, if I'm stable and reliable, she'll feel secure. Women feel, if I don't feel alive, something must be wrong. And both are speaking honestly from different neurochemical realities. This is why modern advice fails. Because you cannot fix a dopamine problem with communication. You cannot logic someone into contentment. You cannot negotiate chemistry. The nervous system must be retrained. But culture does the opposite. It encourages stimulation. Endless scrolling, endless choice, endless comparison. So dissatisfaction becomes normal, and peace feels suspicious. This is the hidden tragedy. Not that women are unhappy, but that unhappiness has become familiar, predictable, comfortable. And when unhappiness becomes familiar, contentment feels foreign, even threatening. And that's where the real danger lies. Because once dissatisfaction becomes identity, no external change will ever be enough. New partner, new city, new lifestyle. Same restlessness, same emptiness, just with different scenery. And now we reach the turning point. Because dopamine explains the mechanism, but it doesn't explain why dissatisfaction feels personal, why it feels like something is missing inside. For that, we need to talk about meaning. And that's where things truly unravel.
Up to now, we've talked about expectations. We've talked about dopamine. We've talked about stimulation and dissatisfaction. But none of that explains the heaviest feeling. The quiet one. The one that sits in the chest late at night. That sense that something is missing, even when life looks fine on paper. This is where unhappiness stops being chemical and becomes existential. Because the deepest reason modern women feel unhappy is not because they lack pleasure, it's because they lack meaning. And meaning doesn't come from comfort. It comes from struggle, direction, and necessity. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Human psychology evolved in environments where survival was uncertain. You mattered because you were needed. Your actions had weight. Your role had consequence. Your choices affected others directly. Meaning wasn't optional. It was built into daily life. Now contrast that with the modern world. Safety is assumed. Comfort is normalized. Convenience is constant. Life no longer demands engagement. It invites consumption. And consumption doesn't create meaning. It creates distraction. This is where emotional confusion begins. Because when survival pressure disappears, the mind starts searching for purpose internally. And internal purpose is fragile. It fluctuates with mood, with validation, with emotion. Which means meaning becomes unstable. One day you feel inspired, the next day empty. Nothing changed externally, but internally everything feels different. This is why unhappiness feels mysterious, because there's no obvious cause. And when there's no cause, the mind invents one. This relationship feels wrong. I'm not fulfilled. I need something more. These statements feel true, but often they're misdirected, because the emptiness isn't coming from the relationship, it's coming from the absence of direction. Now let's be precise. Meaning is not happiness. Meaning often feels heavy, demanding, constraining, sometimes uncomfortable. But it grounds the nervous system. It tells the brain, this matters. Comfort does the opposite. Comfort removes friction, and friction is what gives actions weight. This is why people with the easiest lives often feel the most confused. Not because they're ungrateful, but because nothing requires them. Nothing pulls them forward. Nothing anchors their identity. So identity becomes emotional. How do I feel today? What feels right now? What excites me? But emotions are not reliable compasses. They fluctuate with hormones, stress, sleep, and stimulation. And when identity follows emotion, instability follows identity. This is why modern unhappiness feels chaotic. One moment, motivation surges. The next, collapse. No external explanation, just internal turbulence. Now here's where this becomes especially dangerous in relationships. Because when meaning is absent internally, relationships become the substitute. The partner is unconsciously tasked with providing purpose, direction, emotional stability, excitement, identity reinforcement. That's an impossible burden. No human being can be someone else's meaning. But modern psychology encourages this expectation. Your partner should complete you. Love should fulfill you. Your relationship should make you happy. These ideas sound romantic. They are psychologically destructive because they turn love into a utility. And once love becomes a utility, dissatisfaction becomes inevitable. Because no relationship can compete with the idea of fulfillment. The idea is infinite, reality is limited, so reality loses. This is why even good relationships feel not enough, not because the partner is failing, but because the role assigned to them is impossible. And here's the cruel paradox. The more comfortable life becomes, the more meaning is expected from relationships, which increases pressure, which increases disappointment, which increases resentment. This is why emotional dissatisfaction often appears suddenly, not because something changed, but because something was missing all along. Now consider a common modern scenario. A woman has freedom, choice, safety, options.
She can leave a relationship at any moment, and because she can leave, she constantly evaluates. Is this right? Is this optimal? Is there something better? Evaluation replaces commitment, and commitment is what creates meaning over time. Meaning is cumulative. It grows through investment, but constant evaluation resets the process, so nothing ever deepens. Everything stays shallow, even when emotions feel intense. This is why relationships feel exhausting. Too much thinking, too much analyzing, too much emotional monitoring. Because when meaning is absent, the mind becomes hyperactive, searching, scanning, questioning, and peace becomes impossible. Now here's the most uncomfortable realization. Many women aren't unhappy because they have bad lives. They're unhappy because they were promised happiness as a destination. And happiness is not a destination. It's a byproduct of purpose, of direction, of responsibility. And responsibility has been framed as oppression. Dependence has been framed as weakness. Sacrifice has been framed as loss. So the very things that create meaning have been psychologically rejected, leaving comfort and emptiness. This is why dissatisfaction feels chronic, because the solution feels forbidden, and the substitutes don't work. More freedom doesn't fix it. More choice doesn't fix it. More self-focus doesn't fix it. They amplify the confusion, because meaning doesn't come from looking inward endlessly. It comes from committing outwardly, to something bigger than the self. Now pause here, because this isn't a judgment, it's a diagnosis. Men suffer from meaning loss too, through endless ambition without purpose. Women experience it emotionally, through endless choice without grounding. Different expressions, same emptiness. And until meaning is reintroduced, no amount of comfort will feel satisfactory. Which brings us to the next chapter. Because once meaning collapses, the mind looks for someone to blame. And when the cause is internal and invisible, the blame turns outward, toward men, toward relationships, toward society. And that's where resentment quietly forms.
When unhappiness has no clear source, the mind does what it has always done best. It searches for someone to hold responsible. This is not cruelty, it's psychology. Human beings struggle to tolerate ambiguity, especially emotional ambiguity. When pain exists without explanation, the brain experiences threat, and threat demands resolution. So the mind constructs a narrative. Something must be wrong. Someone must be responsible. This is where resentment is born, not from hatred, but from confusion. Resentment is what happens when discomfort cannot be explained internally, so it is relocated externally. Psychology calls this projection. Projection is the unconscious transfer of internal conflict onto an external target. Instead of asking, "Why do I feel empty?" the mind asks, "Who is making me feel this way?" And relationships are the easiest target, because relationships are intimate, emotionally charged, and already loaded with expectation. This is why dissatisfaction often morphs into quiet anger, not explosive rage, but irritation, disappointment, emotional distance, the kind that shows up as sighs, eye rolls, silence, or constant critique. Not because the partner suddenly changed, but because the internal conflict needed an outlet. Now let's slow this down. Imagine someone feeling unfulfilled, but unable to articulate why. They have comfort, security, choice, but internally there's restlessness, a dull ache, no language for it, no obvious solution. So the mind simplifies, "This relationship isn't making me happy." That sentence feels actionable. It gives the discomfort a shape, and once the discomfort has a shape, the mind can justify emotional withdrawal. This is where resentment begins to grow quietly. Every small flaw becomes symbolic. Every mistake feels heavier. Every limitation feels intentional. He doesn't understand me. He's holding me back. He's not enough. These thoughts feel true, not because they are accurate, but because they relieve internal pressure. Blame provides relief, temporary relief, and that relief is reinforcing. Now here's where modern culture plays a critical role. We live in a narrative environment that encourages external blame, systemic blame, gender blame, structural blame. These narratives offer simple explanations for complex emotional states. They say, if you're unhappy, it's because someone else failed you. This framing is emotionally soothing because it removes responsibility, but it also removes agency. Once unhappiness is outsourced, self-reflection becomes unnecessary, and growth becomes optional. This is why resentment often hardens instead of resolving, because resentment doesn't ask to be solved, it asks to be justified, and modern discourse is very good at justification. Now consider how this plays out emotionally. A woman feels restless, disconnected, unfulfilled. Instead of interpreting this as a signal for internal restructuring, the mind interprets it as relational failure. And once that interpretation locks in, every interaction is filtered through suspicion. Neutral behavior feels neglectful, boundaries feel controlling, stability feels suffocating. This is not manipulation, it's emotional meaning-seeking gone wrong. The mind wants coherence, and blame creates coherence. Now here's the crucial insight. Resentment rarely begins with anger. It begins with disappointment, unspoken disappointment. Disappointment that accumulates without being processed. And when disappointment is not examined internally, it turns outward into criticism, withdrawal, moral judgment. This is why resentment often feels morally justified, because the mind reframes emotional discomfort as ethical failure. He should be more. He should know. He should change. These statements place responsibility outside. And once responsibility is externalized, the relationship becomes adversarial. Not consciously, subtly, emotionally. This is how intimacy erodes without a single argument. Now let's be precise again. This is not unique to women. Men project too, often through anger, control, or withdrawal. The difference lies in expression. Men externalize through action. Women externalize through emotion. Both are responses to unresolved internal tension, and both create relational breakdown. Now here's the dangerous loop. Once resentment forms, it alters perception. The brain selectively notices evidence that confirms the narrative. This is called confirmation bias. Small moments are magnified, positive moments are dismissed. The mind begins collecting proof, not intentionally, automatically. This is why conversations feel pointless at this stage, because the emotional verdict has already been reached. Logic arrives too late. Now ask yourself this. If unhappiness comes from internal meaning loss and resentment projects that loss outward, what happens when resentment is validated socially? It hardens, because now it's not just personal, it's ideological. Now the emotional narrative becomes, I'm not unhappy, I'm awakened. I'm not dissatisfied, I'm aware. I'm not resentful, I'm empowered. This is how emotional pain disguises itself as insight. And once that disguise forms, self-examination becomes almost impossible, because questioning resentment feels like betrayal. Now pause here. This is not condemnation, it's a warning, because resentment feels powerful, but it corrodes intimacy. And the longer resentment operates unchecked, the harder it becomes to reconnect, because resentment doesn't just distance partners, it distances the individual from themselves. Now here's the quiet tragedy. Many people believe leaving the relationship will dissolve resentment. Sometimes it does, temporarily, but often the resentment follows. New partner, same dissatisfaction, because the source was never external, and until the internal conflict is confronted, the cycle repeats. This is why some people feel perpetually disappointed in love, not unlucky, but misdirected. Now we approach a critical threshold, because once resentment reaches a certain intensity, it demands resolution. And that resolution often comes in the form of emotional collapse, a breaking point, a moment where something ends, not necessarily the relationship, but the illusion. And that's where the next chapter takes us.
There comes a point when dissatisfaction stops whispering. It stops showing up as mild irritation, quiet distance, or vague restlessness. And instead, it demands release. This is the emotional collapse. Not a dramatic explosion, but an internal breaking point. Because no human nervous system can indefinitely carry unresolved tension. What was once background noise becomes unbearable. The weight that was ignored now demands action. And when the mind cannot locate the real cause, it chooses the most emotionally available outlet. This is why collapse often looks sudden to outsiders. One day everything was fine, and then it wasn't. But nothing collapsed overnight. It accumulated silently. For months, sometimes years. Small disappointments left unprocessed. Expectations unmet but unspoken. Meaning eroded slowly. And then something minor becomes the trigger. A conversation. A comment. A routine conflict. And suddenly the reaction feels disproportionate. Tears appear unexpectedly. Anger feels overwhelming. Distance becomes absolute. Not because of the moment, but because the system is overloaded. Psychology refers to this as affective overflow. When emotional regulation fails and suppressed feelings rush forward all at once. This is why collapse feels confusing even to the person experiencing it. I don't know why I feel this way. I just can't do this anymore. Something broke. These statements are honest. Because collapse is not strategic. It's physiological. The nervous system is attempting to relieve pressure. Now here's where things become especially painful. Because collapse often seeks finality. The mind wants an end, an explanation, a clean break. Because ambiguity has become intolerable. This is why decisions made during emotional collapse often feel extreme. Sudden detachment, abrupt ultimatums, radical reevaluations of the past. The relationship becomes reinterpreted retroactively. Moments once seen as normal are now framed as oppressive. Compromises once accepted are now seen as sacrifices. Stability is reframed as stagnation. This reinterpretation is not manipulation, it's self-protection. The mind is trying to justify the intensity of the emotional response. Because if the collapse feels justified, the pain feels meaningful. And meaning makes pain tolerable. Now pause here. This is the stage where many people believe they've woken up. Where phrases like, "I finally see clearly," "I've been suppressing myself," "I need to choose myself," begin to appear. These statements feel empowering. And in some cases they are. But empowerment without clarity can be destructive. Because collapse does not guarantee insight. It only guarantees release. And release without understanding often leads to repetition. This is why some people leave relationships convinced they've escaped unhappiness, only to feel the same dissatisfaction return months later. Different partner? Same restlessness. Different context? Same emptiness. Because the collapse relieved the pressure, but didn't resolve the cause. Now let's talk about what happens emotionally at this stage. During collapse, emotional memory becomes selective. The brain prioritizes negative recall. This is a survival response. When leaving something feels necessary, the mind exaggerates reasons to leave. This reduces internal conflict. So memories are edited. Positive moments lose emotional weight. Negative moments gain significance. This is why reconciliation feels impossible during collapse. Not because love is gone, but because the mind is defending the decision emotionally. This is also why communication fails here. Because one person is speaking from regulation, and the other from overflow. Different emotional realities. Different nervous system states. Now here's the most tragic part. Many collapses are not failures of love. They are failures of emotional literacy. The inability to identify meaning loss, dopamine dependency, projection, expectation inflation before the system breaks. And because these forces are invisible, collapse feels mysterious, personal, fated. This just wasn't right. But often what wasn't right was the internal framework, not the relationship itself. Now let's be clear again. Collapse is not weakness. It's a signal. A signal that something fundamental has been misaligned for too long. The danger is not collapse. The danger is misunderstanding it. Because when collapse is framed solely as relational failure, the same emotional architecture is carried forward, which means the next relationship begins under the same invisible pressures, and the cycle repeats. Hope, intensity, stability, restlessness, collapse, over and over again. This is why some people describe love as exhausting, not because love is flawed, but because their internal system is fighting it. Now here's the turning point. Collapse can be destructive, or it can be revelatory. It depends on what happens next. If collapse leads to external blame alone, resentment hardens. If collapse leads to self-examination, transformation becomes possible. But self-examination requires something modern culture rarely encourages: stillness, responsibility, and the willingness to tolerate discomfort without immediately escaping it. This is where many people turn away, because stillness feels unbearable after collapse. The mind wants distraction, validation, a new story. But without pause, insight never arrives. Now listen carefully. This chapter is not about telling people to stay in relationships that are harmful. That's not the point. The point is understanding why collapse happens so it doesn't become the default exit strategy for internal pain. Because collapse is a warning, not a solution. And until that warning is understood, freedom will always feel temporary. Which brings us to the next chapter. Because after collapse, a choice must be made. Either the cycle repeats, or something fundamentally changes. And that change begins not with love, but with truth.
After collapse comes clarity, if it's sought. If the storm passes and the mind finally pauses, a new question emerges. What do I really want? What truly matters? And why have I been chasing the wrong things all along? This is the bitter truth. Because lasting contentment is not born from external stimuli. It is not created by validation, excitement, or novelty. It is not granted by attention or control. It is earned internally, forged through confrontation with reality, discipline, and responsibility. The first step, and it's brutal for most to accept, is realizing that unhappiness is not always someone else's fault. No partner, no system, no circumstance. Yes, external factors can amplify dissatisfaction, but the origin lies in internal structures, your expectations, your values, your tolerance for discomfort. Let's be precise. Modern women and men alike have been conditioned to expect constant stimulation, endless novelty, immediate emotional validation, flawless alignment with internal desires. But reality rarely provides perfection. Comfort without purpose breeds boredom. Freedom without direction breeds emptiness. Attention without investment breeds addiction. This is the invisible trap. You might feel angry at the world. You might feel betrayed by love. You might feel misunderstood or undervalued. All of these emotions are valid, but they are symptoms, not solutions. Here's where masculine empathy matters. My friend, contentment is a muscle. It grows only when trained. It grows through resistance, through acceptance, and through engagement with life as it is, not as it should be. Consider the following modern case study. A woman spends years seeking the perfect man. She leaves one relationship after another. She chases novelty, excitement, the dopamine hit of validation. Yet each time she finds herself empty, restless, and questioning the meaning of her choices. The pattern is clear. The nervous system craves stimulation. The mind seeks justification. The heart hopes for connection. But without a framework for self-grounding, no relationship, no person can ever satisfy her internal demands. The bitter truth? The cycle continues until internal alignment is achieved. So what does internal alignment look like? Acceptance of reality. Understanding that life is imperfect, relationships are imperfect, and people, including yourself, will fail in small ways. Purpose beyond emotion. Meaning comes from pursuing goals, contributing to something bigger than oneself, and taking responsibility for one's own life. Emotional literacy. Recognizing internal states, triggers, and projection tendencies. Learning to feel discomfort without immediate escape. Bounded desire. Understanding that endless stimulation is a trap. Happiness does not rise indefinitely with external novelty. It is cumulative, slow, and stable. Commitment discipline. The ability to invest over time even when the nervous system craves newness. Love, trust, and intimacy grow only when consistency is maintained. Let's return to reality. The woman addicted to men who act like nothing. The woman who feels restless despite comfort. The woman who projects dissatisfaction onto partners. None of these behaviors are moral failings. They are neurochemical and psychological adaptations to modern conditions. And until these conditions are understood, external solutions, a new partner, new lifestyle, new validation, are temporary. They are dopamine spikes with no structural change. Here's a second case study. A man in a stable, loving relationship finds himself labeled boring. His partner seeks novelty elsewhere. He is confused, hurt, and frustrated. The bitter truth? His behavior is not the problem. The internal framework of stimulation and expectation in the partner is untrained. Until she builds meaning and stability internally, no external consistency can create lasting contentment. This is the ultimate paradox of modern relationships. Desire is infinite, reality is finite. And without internal work, the gap between expectation and reality becomes a perpetual source of emotional collapse. Now, my brother, here's the final insight. Contentment is unfashionable. It is quiet. It does not trend on social media. It does not provide instant gratification. It requires patience, reflection, and self-governance. But it works. It stabilizes relationships. It stabilizes the mind. It stabilizes life. Once you internalize this bitter truth, you begin to see relationships differently. You see them as mirrors of internal alignment rather than external validation. You see dissatisfaction as a signal rather than a verdict. You see collapse as a warning rather than a failure. And when this understanding is integrated, you begin to notice something remarkable. Stability becomes appealing. Consistency feels like freedom. Investment becomes empowering. Peace becomes addictive. Because contentment is never external. It is earned from within. And this is the secret no one tells you. Happiness is not found in men, women, novelty, or stimulation. It is produced internally through disciplined alignment of purpose, responsibility, and emotional mastery. So when you watch relationships unravel around you, or see someone addicted to novelty, drama, or validation, remember the root cause is rarely the partner. It is often the nervous system, unexamined meaning, and unresolved emotional architecture. And this is the bitter, liberating, and ultimately empowering truth. Because once understood, nothing external can destabilize you. You are anchored, you are aware, you are free.
After collapse comes clarity, if it's sought. If the storm passes and the mind finally pauses, a new question emerges. What do I really want? What truly matters? And why have I been chasing the wrong things all along? This is the bitter truth. Because lasting contentment is not born from external stimuli. It is not created by validation, excitement, or novelty. It is not granted by attention or control. It is earned internally, forged through confrontation with reality, discipline, and responsibility. The first step, and it's brutal for most to accept, is realizing that unhappiness is not always someone else's fault. No partner, no system, no circumstance. Yes, external factors can amplify dissatisfaction, but the origin lies in internal structures, your expectations, your values, your tolerance for discomfort. Let's be precise. Modern women and men alike have been conditioned to expect constant stimulation, endless novelty, immediate emotional validation, flawless alignment with internal desires. But reality rarely provides perfection. Comfort without purpose breeds boredom. Freedom without direction breeds emptiness. Attention without investment breeds addiction. This is the invisible trap. You might feel angry at the world. You might feel betrayed by love. You might feel misunderstood or undervalued. All of these emotions are valid, but they are symptoms, not solutions. Here's where masculine empathy matters. My friend, contentment is a muscle. It grows only when trained. It grows through resistance, through acceptance, and through engagement with life as it is, not as it should be. Consider the following modern case study. A woman spends years seeking the perfect man. She leaves one relationship after another. She chases novelty, excitement, the dopamine hit of validation. Yet each time she finds herself empty, restless, and questioning the meaning of her choices. The pattern is clear. The nervous system craves stimulation. The mind seeks justification. The heart hopes for connection. But without a framework for self-grounding, no relationship, no person can ever satisfy her internal demands. The bitter truth? The cycle continues until internal alignment is achieved. So what does internal alignment look like? Acceptance of reality. Understanding that life is imperfect, relationships are imperfect, and people, including yourself, will fail in small ways. Purpose beyond emotion. Meaning comes from pursuing goals, contributing to something bigger than oneself, and taking responsibility for one's own life. Emotional literacy. Recognizing internal states, triggers, and projection tendencies. Learning to feel discomfort without immediate escape. Bounded desire. Understanding that endless stimulation is a trap. Happiness does not rise indefinitely with external novelty. It is cumulative, slow, and stable. Commitment discipline. The ability to invest over time even when the nervous system craves newness. Love, trust, and intimacy grow only when consistency is maintained. Let's return to reality. The woman addicted to men who act like nothing,
the woman who feels restless despite comfort, the woman who projects dissatisfaction onto partners. None of these behaviors are moral failings. They are neurochemical and psychological adaptations to modern conditions. And until these conditions are understood, external solutions, a new partner, new lifestyle, new validation, are temporary. They are dopamine spikes with no structural change. Here's a second case study. A man in a stable, loving relationship finds himself labeled boring. His partner seeks novelty elsewhere. He is confused, hurt, and frustrated. The bitter truth? His behavior is not the problem. The internal framework of stimulation and expectation in the partner is untrained. Until she builds meaning and stability internally, no external consistency can create lasting contentment. This is the ultimate paradox of modern relationships. Desire is infinite, reality is finite. And without internal work, the gap between expectation and reality becomes a perpetual source of emotional collapse. Now, my brother, here's the final insight. Contentment is unfashionable. It is quiet. It does not trend on social media. It does not provide instant gratification. It requires patience, reflection, and self-governance. But it works. It stabilizes relationships. It stabilizes the mind. It stabilizes life. Once you internalize this bitter truth, you begin to see relationships differently. You see them as mirrors of internal alignment rather than external validation. You see dissatisfaction as a signal rather than a verdict. You see collapse as a warning rather than a failure. And when this understanding is integrated, you begin to notice something remarkable. Stability becomes appealing. Consistency feels like freedom. Investment becomes empowering. Peace becomes addictive. Because contentment is never external. It is earned from within. And this is the secret no one tells you. Happiness is not found in men, women, novelty, or stimulation. It is produced internally through disciplined alignment of purpose, responsibility, and emotional mastery. So when you watch relationships unravel around you, or see someone addicted to novelty, drama, or validation, remember the root cause is rarely the partner. It is often the nervous system, unexamined meaning, and unresolved emotional architecture. And this is the bitter, liberating, and ultimately empowering truth. Because once understood, nothing external can destabilize you. You are anchored, you are aware, you are free.